In the year 722 BCE, the armies of the Assyrian Empire, the dominant power of the time, were advancing towards a new target. The Kingdom of Israel, under the command of a newly crowned king who needed to prove himself on the battlefield, found itself facing Second Sargon, a king driven by ambitions of war and conquest. His ambitions left an enduring mark on Jewish history, creating a wound that would remain open for thousands of years. Before the Assyrian occupation, the Kingdom of Israel was a confederation state governed by different Jewish tribes for 300 years. The kingdom's borders stretched from the north of Jerusalem to the present-day border of Lebanon. By the 8th century BCE, as the Assyrian Empire seized some significant cities on the Lebanese coast, the Kingdom of Israel and the Assyrian Empire became neighboring states. In 722 BCE, the most suitable target for Second Sargon, who had seized power through a palace coup in the same year, was their new neighbors. Through a military campaign launched within the same year, the Kingdom of Israel was invaded. The Assyrians, who implemented a policy of permanent settlement in the regions they captured in the capital Samaria, placed their own people in the newly conquered area, while dispatching the local population to different regions of the empire. The Israelites were not exempt from this policy. Second Sargon forced the Jewish tribes to migrate to the inner regions of the empire by dividing them into small fragments. During this process, the Jewish population in the region decreased, while the Assyrian population continued to increase steadily. However, the settled region was under the influence of the dominant Jewish culture, and over time, the Assyrians began to adopt this culture. They were called Samaritans, but they were never accepted by the Jews and continued to exist as a separate people in the region. The exiled Jewish tribes, on the other hand, disappeared into the dusty pages of history. Even today, these tribes are referred to as the lost tribes of the Jews. Meanwhile, in 587 BCE, this time the Babylonians invaded the kingdom of Judah located in the south. The armies of King Nebuchadnezzar II entered Jerusalem and destroyed the Solomon's temple. Thus, the period known as the First Temple period in Jewish history came to an end. However, this was also the beginning of a new era. The Babylonian exile period began with the invasion of the Babylonians into the kingdom of Judah and their deportation of the Israelites to Babylon. This period was a major turning point in Jewish history, with significant political and social implications. The destruction of Solomon's temple changed the Jewish belief that there was a deep connection between them and God. Until then, Jews believed there was a special connection between them and God, especially at the temple, but the destruction of the temple led to the development of the belief that God could be worshipped outside the temple. During this process, synagogues became sacred places for Jews. Although Jerusalem had been taken away and ravaged, Jews never gave up ideologically and continued to live with the dream of returning to Jerusalem someday. The Messianic belief, with the expectation that a leader from the line of King David would come and lead them back to Jerusalem, emerged during this period. The Babylonian exile of the Jews did not last as long as the previous exile. Cyrus the Great, the Achaemenid emperor, defeated the Babylonians in the Battle of Opis in 539 BCE, capturing the city of Babylon. Cyrus and the Persians had adopted a policy of tolerance towards different religions, which worked in favor of the Jews. The Babylonian exile came to an end, and the Jews were granted permission to return to their lands. Solomon's temple was rebuilt by Cyrus, marking the beginning of the Second Temple period in Jewish history. However, not all Jews returned from exile. Especially wealthy Jews chose to stay voluntarily in Babylon. Those who returned were mostly the poorer people. One of the greatest results of the Assyrian and Babylonian exiles was the dispersion of Jews to different regions of the world. By the 3rd century BCE, there were Jewish communities in the Aegean Islands, Greece, Italy, Egypt, and the territories of present-day Anatolia. It is difficult to provide precise information about the size of these communities, but we know that during the reign of the Roman Emperor Augustus in the late 1st century BCE, There were more than 7,000 Jews in Rome. The Roman rule in Israel began in 63 BCE when Pompey the Great captured Jerusalem. Thousands of Jewish prisoners of war were brought from Judea to Rome and sold as slaves. After being freed, these Jewish slaves settled permanently in Rome as traders. However, over time, relations between the two sides began to deteriorate. In 66 CE, Jews initiated a major rebellion, which quickly turned into the First Jewish-Roman War. Romans were militarily and technologically superior to the Jews, but the province of Judea was quite distant from the center of the empire and not easily supported logistically. Therefore, the wars between the Romans and the Jews continued for 7 years. In the summer of 70 CE, Emperor Titus, after a prolonged siege, breached the walls of Jerusalem and entered the city, once again laying it to waste. Thus, the Second Temple period came to an end. A large part of the Jewish population in the city was killed, and the remaining 97,000 Jews were taken as captives and slaves to Rome. Around 30,000 of them were resettled in Carthage. According to the historian Josephus, those who managed to escape were scattered across the eastern Mediterranean and Mesopotamia. History had been rewritten, and this time the Jews were once again exiled, but by another empire. The First Roman-Jewish Wars concluded entirely in the year 73 CE. The enslavement policy imposed by the Romans led to a decline in the Jewish population in the region. However, a significant number of Jews still lived in and around Jerusalem. Nevertheless, a new uprising that erupted in 132 CE would change this situation. Sometime after the capture of Jerusalem in 70 CE, a Roman colony named Aelia Capitolina was established on the ruins of the city. Now, a colossal temple of Jupiter stood in place of the old temple, and the city had transformed into a Roman military garrison. All of this had one single meaning: the eradication of Jewish culture in the region. Despite being well-planned and lasting for 3 years, this rebellion was brutally suppressed by the Roman army. The Roman historian Cassius Dio described the aftermath of the uprising as follows: 50 of their most important fortresses and 985 of their most famous villages were razed to the ground. In various skirmishes and battles, 580,000 men were killed. The number of those who perished from famine, disease, and fire could not be ascertained. The cities were demolished and turned into heaps of dust. Almost the entire race of the Jews was annihilated. However, the consequences of the Bar Kokhba revolt were truly devastating for the Jews. Jewish war captives were recaptured by the Romans and sold into slavery. Jews were forbidden from entering Jerusalem except for major religious days. The Jewish defeats in Judea in 70 CE and 135 CE resulted in the sale of many Jewish prisoners of war as slaves from Israel. Additionally, the number of those voluntarily migrating due to the outcome of the wars had significantly increased. Jewish prisoners and their children, who were sold as slaves, were later emancipated and joined local free communities. This situation led to the dispersion of Jews to various parts of the world. When Islamic armies conquered Palestine in 638, the Jewish population in the region was approximately 150,000, and entering Jerusalem was still prohibited for them. When Caliph Umar captured Jerusalem, he lifted this ban, and after a process of 500 years, Jews found the opportunity to settle freely in Jerusalem again. Although some restrictions were imposed on Jews over time, their freedoms were not significantly interfered with. However, a new problem arose: high taxes. Heavy taxes on agricultural lands initially forced many Jews to migrate from rural areas to towns and pushed many Jews out of the country. By the end of the 11th century, the Jewish population in Palestine had significantly decreased. As a result of the intermittent exiles that occurred over thousands of years, the Jewish population had begun to disperse to different regions of the world. Those who went to present-day Germany and northeastern France became known as Ashkenazi Jews. Those who went to Spain and Portugal became Sephardic Jews, and those who settled in Egypt, Iraq, and the Klima region became Mizrahi Jews. Among them, especially European Jews in the 17th and 18th centuries, crossed the ocean and settled in America. After centuries passed since the exiles, the term diaspora was first used in 1876 to describe these exiles, and Jews around the world were referred to as diaspora Jews. After the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, some of the Jews in the diaspora returned to their ancestral lands. The rest continue to live around the world to this day.